Zac Altman, thank you so much for joining us on Build It, They'll Come.
Yes, thank you for welcoming me.
Now, what does a guy do who's still very young, who's already sold two businesses, built them up and then sold them? What do? Do you go and retire? Do you find a tropical island? Do you rush back into something else, or do you sit back and spend all your money?
That is a great question. I think for me, I don't think I'd ever be able to retire. I think I look to my grandfather, who even after he retired from his business back in the day, like for years and even decades afterwards, he was still trying to do deals and trying to do business. And I think I very much have a similar sort of spirit in that I don't think I'll ever be able to stop. I've tried to take a break, and I very much find myself itching to get back into things. And so it's just trying to figure out what will capture my attention enough. Because I know from building companies before that everything takes time. And so like a company is a 5, 10, 15-year endeavor. And so what would be able to keep me entertained and keep me engaged for 10 plus years is kind of very much what I'm focused on right now. And so bounced around a bit, but trying to narrow my focus.
So you haven't actually gone into anything new, a new venture, a new startup?
Well, I think I have a philosophy around like increasing your surface area of opportunity. And so I think in order to do that, you need to try a lot of different things. And that doesn't mean necessarily like build a company around it. It means exploring, learning enough to know that maybe it's a bad idea. So I haven't necessarily like formally started a company, but I definitely have a lot of different projects going on right now in different areas that I'm exploring.
Well, let's start not quite at the end, but partway through. In March 2019, a year before the world lockdown with the COVID pandemic, you sold your second startup, the travel business Loungebuddy, to the giant US company American Express. And that was, 6 or 7 years after you'd started it, co-founded it, left Australia's shores to try your luck in the US. So let's sort of start at the end. How did that sale to American Express make you feel?
It was a very mixed emotions period, because on one hand you have this like amazing exit and amazing opportunity that's kind of almost feels like it's been handed your way. But at the same time, it was probably one of the busiest, most stressful periods of my life. And so you have this kind of tension of like, I should be really excited and happy, but I'm more exhausted and stressed than I've ever been before.
And why is that? Why is the stress and the exhausted part?
Because I think it's like the immensity of responsibility and the amount of things that you have to do. Because going from a small, like 30-person company to American Express as a 60,000 person, like massive organization, there's a lot of change that kind of comes with that. There's a lot of whether it's processes, and meanwhile you're trying to still like move quickly as a company and be the startup spirit. Meanwhile, trying to like shift into this much larger enterprise kind of structure. And so there's a lot of different things that go on. It doesn't all of a sudden you receive a paycheck and then all of a sudden you're on vacation the next week. I did take a week off, went to Bali for the first time.
Just a week.
Yeah, took a week off and then right back into it. And yeah, trying to move, because you're learning like a whole new organization and how to navigate that. And like we were the first in a string of American Express acquisitions, and they hadn't done acquisitions in about a decade or something at that point. And so
it was kind of new territory for them.
It was new territory for them. It was new territory for us. And so thankfully, like we were able to smooth the road for some of the acquisitions that came after us. Like Resi was the big dining one at that period.
Right.
And so yeah, there's a lot of learnings on all sides.
Yeah, no, interesting. We'll come back to that. But the sale price, are you able to say how much it was for? I mean, did that sort of blow your mind, or did you think, oh, we gave that away too cheaply? Or did you think, no, this is really liberating? This is a great reward for what we've built up?
Yeah, so definitely life-changing for a lot of us in that it's like wouldn't have to work again kind of vibes. But I know like just for some context of like how we went through some of that process, like at the time we were a profitable company. So we weren't like in a bind to sell. And then at the same time, like there were 3 founders. And one of the exercises that we did is when they initially approached us for the acquisition was...
So they approached you. You hadn't been looking for a buyer?
No, we weren't looking. So we were already partners with them at that time.
That's right.
So we'd already powered like parts of the American Express app. We were already like integrated within all of the Centurion lounges and doing a bunch of other endeavors with them. So we knew each other. And I think that's, for a lot of acquisitions, like that's the way that it happens, is you're already friends, and it's kind of this idea of, okay, what if we were more than friends? And then you move from there. And so what we did is we put, like, each of the founders put our numbers into a hat of like, what would we say yes to? What's the minimum? And then pulled those anonymously, picked out the largest one and said, okay, this is the minimum target. And we ended up going well beyond that, which was very fortunate for us. And so I think for everyone, for the team, for our investors, for us as founders, it was like as good of an outcome as we could have hoped for at that time. So
yeah, I guess at this point we should explain what is Loungebuddy, because it's still going strong.
Yeah,
it's an app, but tell us what it is.
So there's lots of different parts to it. So the most public facing part is our app, and so that would think of it like a Yelp for lounges, and so it tells you information about what airport lounges and airport facilities exist, as well as a big piece on top of that is access policies. So if you had an Amex card, or if you had a Qantas Platinum status, or any combination of those, we would tell you which lounges you could access.
Around the world?
Around the world. And then the next part of that is if you didn't have access, then we, for over 350 lounges, I think it was at the time, we would do pay per entry lounge access. So for about $35, you'd be able to purchase access to a lounge for a period of time.
And what were you, just the sort of the platform? Like, did the end consumer paid that, and did the lounge owner get that, or did you get a cut of that?
So we took a cut of that. And so it ranged, depends on the location, anywhere from 10% to like 60% for some of them, average of probably like 35%. So decent margins. And then, so that was like the most consumer facing part. And then for lounges, like, for context, this is an industry that doesn't have a lot of technology. And so we're talking about an era when, like, we all have smartphones. We all have smartphones, but a lot of the lounges are still like managing the reservations on a piece of paper.
Really?
So the reason you couldn't book within 24 hours until we came along, was because they'd already printed the piece of paper. And so you couldn't cancel, you couldn't book. And so what we did is we put a management solution in the front of all the lounges. And so that meant in real time that they could see the bookings coming in. You could cancel right up until the last minute.
And were you the first to do this? I mean, surely an American company had sort of thought about this.
We were the American company. So there were other companies that were doing some semblances of it. And so there was like Priority Pass, Dragon Pass that were doing membership models. They'd been around since before I was born. And there were other companies that were doing some paper entry models, but none at the scale that we were doing them, and none that were powering like programs like Expedia and American Express and all these different groups. So we definitely did well on the partnerships angle, as well as like the customer experience angle as well.
So in fact, you had 2 customers. You had the end consumer, the traveller, but plus you had the airport lounge owners.
Yeah.
And were credit card companies and all that sort of thing involved as well?
Yeah. So that's the fascinating thing about coming into an industry that doesn't have technology, is you end up having to do a lot. So where we started with the lounge information, like the reason we did that is in order to sell access to lounges is you kind of need to market them and provide the information and know what lounges exist. And there was no place that we could pull that data from. And so we ended up creating it ourselves. And then a lot of the locations were like, oh, we could just hook into their management tool that they have at the front desk. And it turns out there wasn't really any of those. And so what we learned throughout our journey was that we had to build all of these pieces and put them together in order to provide the solution that we wanted. And like by building that platform, it was great because it gave us a lot of the partnerships. Like our original partnership with American Express was they wanted the data about the lounges that they were offering for their customers, and they just didn't have that. And so they would have to either collect it themselves and validate it themselves, or where else were they going to get it from? Because their partners didn't have it. And so we were the ones that could.
Right. So is that what really attracted American Express to you? Why were they so interested in you?
I think that's what got them, that was like their first taste of what we could do. And then I think what got them very interested was like when we started deploying, we called it Loungebus. It was went at the front of the lounges and managed the access policies and entry process. Once we started putting that into the locations and replaced, they had an existing like hacked together like butchered solution that would take like minutes to check any person in. And for us, it was just tap a few buttons and you were in seconds. And so when we started putting, you know, the pieces of technology that we had like into the right places, they realized that by working with us, they would, because they've always been the leaders of that industry, particularly within lounge and travel. And so by working with us, that they would continue to be the leaders and to extend their leadership because, you need to compete on the experience instead of just having the number of locations.
Yeah, just to digress slightly, It's so interesting, the whole concept, because I mean, you know, Australians are probably more used to going into airport lounges that either their airline invites them into or that the status of the ticket they bought allows them to enter. I don't know that a lot of Australians think, oh, I can pay to go to a lounge and maybe have a shower or sit in a comfortable chair. Is that what you found, or am I wrong in that?
So funnily enough, Australians were our top customer segment.
Really?
Our number one locations were in like Dubai and in Bali.
But were people paying for access?
And people paying for access.
Wow,
This is like the paid access.
Yeah.
And so Australians were our top customer segment, and the UK as well. And I think what a lot of people don't realize with this is that like when you're getting access to a lounge, there's a lot of policies and stuff that happen behind the scenes. And so even though you're getting access with your ticket or you're getting access with your status, there is the resolution of billing and everything that happens. And so there are specialized solutions that you need when you're checking someone in, that one validates that they have the right status, and that two, actually does the billing processes and makes sure that if you're a British Airways customer going into a Qantas lounge, you know, Qantas is charging British Airways for that entry. And so how do you resolve that at the end of the day? And so we provided a lot of the tools and stuff around it. So
but also, why would consumers, the end traveller, why would they go with you rather than just go up to the airline, up to the lounge and say, oh, can I get entry and I'll pay $35?
Two parts. One, even if they were going up, they were likely using us anyway. And so we were a tool that existed behind the scenes. And so when you're getting free access or something like that, we are probably powering that entry for a lot of locations. So where it's like the hidden part of when you're on a plane and you don't buy food, the food still comes from somewhere and it's likely not made by the airline. There's a multi-billion-dollar company behind the scenes that is making all the food for all the airlines. And so it's those hidden things that you don't necessarily see. And then the second part is a lot of those locations, we provided capacity management and solutions for them and the ability to provide flexible options of entry so that when they're busy and they have their top tier customers coming in and they're going to be busy, that they don't offer entry. And when because it's fixed, like there's fixed costs of the location and the food and everything. And so when they're empty, allowing additional passengers to come in. And so there was no other way for them to be able to offer that. And so for a lot of our partners, they weren't able to offer it themselves because they weren't able to implement a solution that would manage those different policies or access periods and stuff like that. Whereas for us, we were just a drop-in thing. All of a sudden, you're increasing the revenue of your location, increasing customer satisfaction, And it was kind of a no-brainer to a lot of our partners.
Yeah. So, Zac, for Loungebuddy, was your main source of revenue, in fact, not the end traveller consumer, it was these partners?
It was a mix. So it was probably a third groups like American Express that were paying us. They were paying us for when people would go through and use our check-in solution. Then we had the second segment, which is the end user, people using our app or more likely our website. We did very well on SEO, so we're getting a lot of people coming through there. And then the third group would be what we called like B2B2C, which was groups like Expedia who would offer like 1 or 2 free lounge entries when they had their loyalty program, or people like Concur that integrated us within their solutions like TripIt, to where people would see their existing trip, they wouldn't have access to a lounge, and so they'd offer it within their product so that they could generate revenue, we could generate revenue, the customer would be getting into a lounge.
So how did Loungebuddy start? Whose idea was it? Where did it come from? And how did you get involved?
So I started it with a good friend, Tyler, who was helping advise on my previous company, Taxi Pro.
So this is Tyler Dickman?
Yes. And so we'd met, there's an interesting diversion to the story. We met at a conference called CES in Las Vegas at a Microsoft party. But we can digress on that. Or
no, tell by all means, give us the drum on that.
Yeah, so when I was a nerdy high schooler, I was obsessed with a product called the Zune, the Microsoft Zune. So if you've watched Guardians of the Galaxy, it's now like a meme. But at the time, it was Microsoft's version of the iPod. And very forward thinking. It was the first one to do like subscription music like Spotify now does. All of that had... I thought it was a great product, but
what
bad
happened
timing.
to it? What happened to that product?
Well, first, it never entered Australia. So, but then second, like that was right around when the iPhone came out.
Yeah.
And as we all know, like
it just
phones
dominated.
killed a lot of like media products. And so...
so back to your story.
Yeah, sorry. So I had a blog around the Zune, and it was blog and a podcast, and it was fairly popular. And so... I was traveling every year. CES is an electronics show where I announce a lot of new products, and there's a lot of parties and everything. And so I got an invite from the Microsoft press team to come to their event at CES. And so ended up going. I don't think they knew how old I was because...
So you're still at high school?
Still at high school. And yeah, probably shouldn't have been allowed into the party given that like drinking ages and everything in the US.
They're 21.
And it's an open bar. So it's kind of an absurd situation.
How old were you when you went to that particular
I was
SES?
16, I think. Yeah.
Wow.
And so, yeah, ended up going to that. And so that's where Tyler and I met. And like he was working in startups in San Francisco at the time. And I was like interested in startups. And so we stayed in touch. He helped with... the taxi product
which we'll get to.
We'll get
back to that, but yeah.
And so anyway, after I'd sold that one, I was visiting the US trying to think of what's next. And I remember there was one evening that we were chatting and we were tossing around all different ideas. And the main focus was travel. And we'd kind of settled on this other idea that I honestly don't remember what it was.
Oh, really? So it's not in the back pocket for...
So it's not in the back pocket.
No.
But we were thinking of like, we've never actually worked together. We've kind of done like small bits of collaboration, but starting a company together is a lot of work. And one of the number one reasons company fails is because of the co-founder relationship. And so let's do a small test project to 1, see how we work together. And then 2, if it's successful, we can use that when speaking to investors and stuff and saying that like we can build successful products, back us for this bigger thing that we want to do.
Very sensible.
Yeah.
For 16. How old was Tyler?
He was 23.
Okay, so he's almost a decade. 7 years older
so
than
this
you.
wasn't when I was 16. This is...
This is further on.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so he's a few years older. And so, yeah, at the time, it was like we set on a smaller side project. And his thing was around like so it was his idea originally, talking around lounges, and we'll just do information for it, never thinking, like part of the original idea was that we'd use these things called karma points that people have additional guest passes. Like when you go into a lounge, you can bring 1 or 2 people with you. And so we'll do this like reciprocal model thing to where like if I let you into a lounge, then maybe someone else will let me into a lounge, and do this kind of social element to it so that you could get into like the more premium locations and stuff like that through the guest policies. And so I think as we went along, it's one of these things of like when you have insights into industries, like you can figure out what the angles are.
Yeah. So in fact, you didn't have a lot of insight into that industry or from the inside. You were thinking from the outside, this is what we can do and where we can take this.
It's like people, because there's a forum called Flyer Talk, and just from our own experiences of like the information sucks, half the time it's wrong. And so we can solve the information thing, and that's like a decent enough product.
And that'll be a great product. Yeah.
And it was like, and it still is. And so, but we didn't quite know necessarily what the different lounge providers would want. As far as like, I would have thought that they had like solutions inside the lounges for managing the check-in process and everything. And it wasn't like this hacked together, butchered solutions. And I would have thought that, you know, a lot of things within this massive multi-billion-dollar industry would have been a lot more sophisticated. And it's kind of like as you peel away the layers, you kind of realize that a lot of it's just like taped together, and a lot of it's just like legacy systems that are very hard to work with. And so you don't have to do anything crazy in order to make waves in some of these.
So you saw an opportunity there rather than think, oh, this is too hard. These are all sort of systems that cross purposes and they don't kind of match. And you saw an opportunity, you two.
Yeah. Yeah. I think this is like a lot of people, there's a lot of quite unsexy industries out there that are like ripe for innovation. And it's not like you have to be bringing AI into every single industry. It's some of them just need like some simple tools in order to manage what they do, and it can make a big difference.
Yeah, and manage it more efficiently.
Exactly. And so that's what we identified, is that it's like there's so many, the hard part for us was that there were so many things that we could do.
Yeah. So how did you refine your project? And was this still the little side project that you were going to sort of take to get funding to then try and boost the bigger project?
Yeah. So on that evening when we kind of came up with the side project idea, like we registered the domain name and everything.
And what was that?
Loungebuddy.
Oh, right. It was that name. Yeah.
I wasn't super thrilled with it at the time, because it was like, okay, like we'll go with Loungebuddy, but we'll change it at some point. We never ended up doing it, and it worked quite well because I think it makes it quite self-explanatory. But on that night, we actually figured out a lot of what we ended up doing, because we figured out that it's like we had this concept of the different phases, and like phase 1, we needed the data, and we needed people to be using that to help us update the data. And then there was some element of like, we thought we were going to be guesting people into lounges, and that was the way that it was going to work. And then the third part was going to be, okay, once we reach enough scale, then we can partner with the lounges. And then instead of being reliant on people actually being there, we'd have unlimited inventory. And then towards the end, be working with larger companies like American Express and those kinds of groups that would then like provide us with a whole bunch of customers that would then be going through those. And so the plan stayed pretty consistent since like day 0, which was quite interesting.
It's really interesting because, well, can I ask you, were you actually trying to solve a problem or come up with a solution for traveling consumers?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing was solving a problem that individually we'd had, and that we identified a lot of people on Flyer Talk, and a lot of people were talking about. And so there was a definite need. Do we think it would be as big as it was? No. And so I think that was probably the biggest surprise to us, but definitely solving a personal and identified need.
Yeah. So you were in San Francisco, or what happened about that? How did you move suddenly from being a high school student and meeting Tyler? You were a high school student in Sydney
Yeah.
and then moving to San Francisco.
And so this was after I'd sold Taxi Pro.
Yeah.
I was going through this exploratory phase of like, what's next, which is very similar to what I'm doing now. But one of the big things there was like, I'd always wanted to move to San Francisco and move to the US, because the way that startups and everything worked in Australia at that time was there were no like VCs. It was all people saying, oh, we'll give you 200K and take 51% of the company. And then like you do all the work and we'll take all the reward. And in the US at that time, like you had a lot of the groups that would give people $1 million for, 10 or 20% of the company based on ideas. And it was just a whole different scale that existed and a whole different like
so the
risk
ecosystem
element.
was much more developed there.
Much more developed, much more favorable to people taking big risks. Australia was very conservative, and it still is, like at this point in the startup ecosystem, somewhat conservative with how they think about building things. But yeah, at the time for me, it was like this mecca, the place that you go, that if you want to make it in the land of startups, you have to make it to San Francisco. And so that was my goal. And so that's what I was over there. I was over there visiting. And that's when Tyler and I first started speaking. But a lot of it was, my goal was to end up there.
Yeah. And when did you actually move? What sort of age were you?
So I was 19 when I moved over. And so...
And what are mum and dad thinking about this?
So some context for this. My parents actually met in San Francisco, and my dad's from Southern California.
Okay.
And so we always had a relationship to the Bay Area.
Yeah.
And then my sister was at Stanford at the time. And so that's just south of San Francisco.
Yep.
And she'd already moved over there.
Yeah.
And
so there was an easier path.
Easier path and
a more logical path.
More logical path. And my dad was like, he was going to do it. And my mom's like, no, now both my babies are gone.
Yeah.
But now she likes to say that we're like boomerangs, that it's like,
you come back.
Kids from Australia go overseas and you always come back. And so, yeah.
Okay, so you moved there, and did it prove to be the mecca? I mean, I know Loungebuddy proved successful, but did it make it easier going there, do you think?
A mix of things. I think one, it definitely makes it easier. Just the concentration of some of the smartest people that you'll meet, all focused on trying to do innovation. And because everyone's coming together under the same goals, it's a lot easier to meet very interesting people. And it's just any company that you want to speak to is based there, and that you want to work with is based there. And then I think the last thing that really makes it a special place is that there's this big kind of like give back or pay it forward culture of a lot of people had moved there and started something, and people took a chance on them, and then they became big. And so there's this culture around like, someone took a chance on me, I'm going to take a chance on other people as well, or I'm going to respond to that email like that CEO that one time responded to me. And so everyone has this ethos around like wanting to pay it forward, or that anyone could be anything. And I'd like to see more of that here, more openness to that. And there's like a lot of it that exists now, which is really exciting coming back.
Yeah. Excuse me. Was it always a big vision for you, a big goal? I mean, I know you said this project was going to be perhaps the first little project to then prove to people that we could do a bigger one, and prove to ourselves that we could work together. Because in one way you'd think that this might only attract a smallish number of high-end travellers who are prepared to pay for lounges.
Yeah, that's exactly what we thought at the start as well. What we didn't quite realize at the time is, one, just how many people go to lounges. And so we did some of the calculations of, if we just changed 1%, and so we're not going to make the lounges any busier, like we're making tens of millions of dollars a year. And that's without changing the observable like impact on anyone's experience at a lounge. And you couple that with like lounge access, and those premium benefits are the number one rated feature for premium credit cards. So a lot of people, like the one thing that they look at for the platinum card or for the Chase Sapphire Reserve, like, is the lounge access that it gets you.
Really?
And when people are chasing like Qantas status or different levels there, part of it is the lounge access.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of funny, these things that it's like, we all like underestimate at the start, but there's a lot of money spent on lounges every year. And it's a much bigger, it's like a 10 to $12 billion. I think when we calculated in 2013, 2014 was changing hands. So not the value of the industry, but the amount that was changing hands for people's access to lounges every year across the world.
Wow.
It's crazy.
10 or $12 billion.
Yeah. And so that's the best example of that is like if a British Airways customer goes into a Qantas lounge, British Airways pays Qantas for that entry.
Right.
So someone's paying for everyone to go in.
So that's actually hard money that's been exchanged.
That's hard money that's exchanged. And they do a lot of like cancelling out.
Yeah.
But it's like, okay, you went to mine, I went to yours. Okay, like we're just going to spend it on like the management of these. But it's a much bigger industry than I anticipated.
What has turned out to be the most profitable part of your business?
Of Loungebuddy?
Yeah.
The most profitable part was probably the check-in solution. So that's where
selling it to the owners of the airport lounges.
Yeah, because we simplify it for them, like reducing the need for additional staff or improving the experience for customers during. The biggest thing is during like busy periods and providing analytics when it's like if there's flight delays and all that sort of stuff, like being able to manage those irregular operations. So that was probably the most profitable, mainly because for us it was all pure profit. But still, like the people paying per entry for lounge access, for me, the most surprising part of that was it wasn't people who already had lounge access. It wasn't the people that had the platinum card or were traveling all the time. It was the people who maybe used to travel or only travel like 3 times a year. And so it's not enough to warrant the premium credit card. It's not enough to get the Qantas platinum status. But when you're traveling, you want that better experience.
Some comfort or some privacy and
paying the extra $5,000 for business class, like you're not doing it. So maybe you're traveling premium economy, which doesn't get you lounge access. And so an extra $50 on your $2,000 ticket, like it's nothing compared to the experience that you then get.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Amazing. So, Zac, what was the funding in the beginning for Loungebuddy? Did you have some savings or some great wads of cash out of Taxi Pro, or did you go using your credit cards? Did you max them out? Was it the bank of family and friends?
So initially, I think for a lot of founders, like the initial cost is your time, because you're not getting paid and you might be spending 6 months. And so can you dip into your savings? So you might not be putting that money to the company, but it's coming from somewhere. And so we definitely did that for a decent period. And then Tyler and I both put a little bit of money in at the start.
Like what sort of amount?
Like 15
10 grand, 50
yeah.
grand?
Like 10, 15.
Right.
Yeah. And then over the first year of our existence, because a lot of people didn't believe that it could be a big industry. And so like over the first year of our existence, we were like kind of doing an ongoing funding round of what is now called safes, but then was convertible notes, basically the same thing. But where it's like you can take checks of like 50 or 100 or 200 grand at like certain caps, but you can take them over a period of time. You don't have to do a set in time priced round. And so the biggest thing that we did is like a lot of people had reservations around nobody's going to want this. And so then we launch and we get 100,000 people in our first 2 weeks using our product. And so then all of a sudden...
You launched what, a website or an app?
Launched an app.
An app,
And so we launched alongside iOS 7.
Yeah.
And like it was crazy because I was just thinking about it. We're now on iOS 17. And so it's crazy to think that it's been like 10 years, the 10-year marker from then.
Yeah.
But we launched alongside iOS 7 and we're featured as one of the must-have travel apps across the App Store. And like we had a lot of like fortune around that. And so
were you profitable from fairly early, or did you need to keep putting the money back into the business?
We needed to keep putting that, because at the start we launched with a product that just gave lounge information.
Yeah.
And so there was zero money.
Pretty basic. Yeah.
And so original thing was nobody wants it. Then we got a lot of people using the product, and then it was no lounge is ever going to work with you. And then we got our first deals with Alaska Airlines and groups like that within a few months of launch. And so then it's like, okay, we can get the inventory. And so what we were continually proving to investors is, because I think, sorry, to take a step back, like a lot of people think that at the start that you either get all investors to say yes or no, and that there's this magical moment. And for a lot of early stage companies, it is kind of a longer slog of investors will say no, but if you keep them updated and you kind of continue to prove that you follow through on your word, and that like their reservations that they might have and that you disagreed with, that you can prove that, you know,
perhaps they were wrong.
That they were wrong, and that you actually understand this industry, and that they should trust some of the future things that you're saying. And so like that's just what we did, kept them updated, continued to prove that like there was business here and there was opportunity here. And like as a result, people would come on over time. And so we originally raised $1 million over the course of that first year. And then at the very end of
So you were 19 or 20.
Yeah.
And you raised $1 million.
Yeah.
With Tyler.
Yeah.
That's extraordinary. From?
It was from like small angels. And this is the difference in the culture.
Yeah.
The US has a lot of like small angel investors, but as angel investors, friends of friends, like different groups, people within the industry, like Concur put in some money.
And you kept control?
And
you guys kept control?
Yeah. So at the end, like the founders had over 50%. And so it was very easy, like when it came to the acquisition time of we just needed to agree between the three of us.
So how much did you raise over the lifetime, I guess, of Loungebuddy that you owned it before?
The total that we raised was $5 million. And so
Australian dollars or US dollars?
US dollars.
Yeah.
At the time as well.
It's amazing.
Yeah. But at the time the dollar was closer. So an Australian dollar would have been closer to like 5 million US is 6 million Australian maybe.
Right.
Now it's a lot different. But yeah, that bigger check came from Founders Fund. And speaking of like surface area of luck and opportunity, like that came because Tyler went to a conference called Web Summit in Portugal. So it wasn't in San Francisco. Went to that conference, met with VCs from the Bay Area, from the US. And that's like, you know, going to those conferences, like we had a booth there and it was a complete failure for us as a company, except for that we were able to raise money from the meetings on the side. And so it's kind of like...
So Founders Fund was one of the funders, and the founders in that was Peter Thiel, who'd been part of the PayPal success story.
PayPal, now Palantir and stuff,
Yeah, so he took a liking to what he heard?
So it wasn't directly him.
Right.
So Founders Fund, their philosophy is, and Peter Thiel's philosophy is like, they like monopolies. And whatever they invest in, they like to see companies that could own the industry and be the sole player within the industry.
It's not very capitalist of them. In fact, it's very capitalist of them, isn't it?
And so, like, I think that's part of what they identified. And part of it was like this idea of this is weird, we don't understand it, but it's succeeding, and I don't understand why we don't understand it, but it looks like it's going to own the industry. And so, yes, I'm in.
Right.
And it's kind of like we want to see how this plays out.
Yeah. And do you mind me asking what sort of percentage did they take?
So I won't know off the top of my head, but I believe at that time we had like a $16 million valuation when they put the money in. And so I forget what the math works out to be, but usually if you're doing the math around startup valuations, like whatever money they put in, it's usually between 10 and 30% of the company that they're now owning. So multiply it by 4 to 6.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the valuation of the company at that time. That's pretty standard terms. So I think they're around like 20% maybe.
Yeah, yeah. And you guys still had control.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so that sort of money frees you up to then scale up. Did you have to hire a lot of computer engineers, or is that your specialty?
Yeah, so as far as where I fit in the company, I was the CTO. So I covered all product engineering and then later on data design.
So are you a computer scientist?
So
computer engineer?
I made it all of 6 months into UTS, and then I left the country and went to the US.
So you don't have a university degree?
So no degree, but I was doing it since I was in high school. And that's part of the reason why I didn't quite enjoy the like the Australian degree process because it starts you from basics and you can't really skip anything.
Yeah. When you say doing it, doing what?
Doing engineering. So I started probably like when I was a kid, I was the sort of kid that would like pull apart the VCR, not know how to put it back together, but pull it apart so that I could see what was inside. I was very curious. Like I wanted to see how things were built. And so then that extended to like when I could use the computer, and I distinctly remember in year like 4 or 5, there was something called free servers. And it's like the .tk domains where you could basically set up a website and put whatever you want on it. And then like that's how I started learning HTML stuff. And then around year 7, I was building websites like using, I don't remember what the services were called, but it was similar to what Upwork and stuff is today. And so I ended up building websites for people in like Canada and different places around the world to make some money on the side because I wanted a new computer screen.
Amazing.
And my parents are like, no way in hell are we buying you. That sort of stuff. And I was like, I'll make my own money. And I was rejected from a job from a pet store. And so I was like, okay, I can make money online. And I did. And PayPal was great for that because you just set up an account, you can receive money, and then all of a sudden you can spend it, which was like a wild experience at that time. And then, yeah, like it kind of topples from there. And then starting to learn how to build stuff for the iPhone in 2008, 2009. And then, yeah, I think it's all logic and learnable and trainable. I think the hardest part of like building a company isn't the engineering or anything around that. It's like the people and the teams, and like it's at the start it is one person, but over time it's can you build a team that's gonna be making the right decisions, that's gonna be that's gonna be building the right things and can do it effectively. And I think a lot of what
can
people
work together and
a lot of people are really selfish. Like they want to be the only person, when at the end of the day, it's like the team is what builds the company. And I think a lot more people should give more equity to members of their team because they're the ones doing a lot of the work. And so, yeah.
Zac, it is so interesting. I mean, you left Australia, at 19 or 20?
Yeah.
You didn't have a university degree. You went to the sort of the centre of the universe for tech companies, and there are PhDs and masters of computing coming out their ears, I'm sure, and out of Stanford. I mean, that's a pretty big leap, and it's a very big leap of faith in yourself.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things where there's sometimes I just don't think, and there's just like I want to do something, so you just do it, and you kind of figure out the repercussions and everything later. Kind of somewhat impulsive in that way, and I think like it's good and it's bad because I think sometimes it's like if you don't know what the challenges are going to be, and you're naive enough to kind of just go and do it, then I think you end up doing a lot more. Because if you I can overthink stuff now, and I find that just when I go with my gut and just go forward and don't research things too much, then like you figure out things along the way. Like every problem is somewhat solvable, and yeah, it's more fun. Just do the fun things.
How big is the Loungebuddy that you guys built? Tell me some markers of success, what it got to when you sold.
Yeah, so easy numbers is we had 100,000 people using the app every month. We had 300,000 people hitting our website every month. We were processing like millions of lounge entries. So like that's the level of scale that we're talking about. And we were profitable with 30 people in our team and everything like that. So.
And you'd obviously sort of started, created, built up, and then sold Taxi Pro. Just tell me briefly about that.
Yeah, so Taxi Pro, it was one of the lucky early ones in that, so context of it, it was a taxi booking app focused on Australia. And this was 2009, so pre-Uber, pre all of those things. And it was very much...
So there was no Uber in 2009, right?
Yeah. Uber was like just existed in the US.
Yes.
And they were just launching around that time. And all it was an app that you could open it up, pick where you were, pick your destination, and book a taxi for now or for later. And the novel thing that it did is that the taxi markets here are very weird, but to simplify it a bit is every taxi company that you called at the time would have to service your order. So even if it's a 5-person taxi company up in the Central Coast and you're in Sydney and you called them up, they would have to be able to somehow get you a taxi in that region. And so they had all these networks that existed that, okay, they would pass it off to Taxis Combined, which is the big one in Sydney. And there was a lot of chains of networks and stuff that would go along. And so usually when you book a taxi and it never showed up, it's because someone canceled along that chain. And so what I did is just mapped everything to the region and said, you're in Sydney, use this taxi company. And it just increased the reliability of booking a taxi a lot. And people noticed that within the product of when I call, I can't get a taxi, but when I use this app, somehow the taxi is more likely to arrive.
But how did you get access to their networks?
So they had websites where you could book. And so all it did is load the website in the background, fill in the data, and click next and register the next page and everything. So I didn't have to work with the taxi companies originally. Then over time, there were discussions and everything.
Wow.
But it's very much, and they tried to make me stop at different points, and they tried to buy it at different points. But they were very, very old. I can see why like Uber ended up doing what they did, because it's very old school thinking. They just wanted to buy it to kill it. Didn't want to innovate. I wanted to iterate on it and improve it and do like real time, where's the taxi kind of stuff. And they didn't want to hear any of that. So ended up selling it to the Catch Group, who's like Scoop on Catch of the Day.
Gabby Leibovich, yeah. He's been a guest on this show.
Yeah, and they took a big chance on me, and so I really appreciate it. And their intent was to compete, to basically build UberX in Australia and used it, like the network that I had as a starting point for that. Unfortunately, Uber hit the market 3 months later, and Uber with big pockets and like a lot of existing networks and all of that sort of stuff completely demolished any sort of market that would have existed for the ride sharing.
Wow. Okay. Well, that
hard
sounds
to compete with $1 billion.
Exactly. That sounds like a great place for us to take a break. So, Zac, will you join me for part 2 to continue our chat about Taxi Pro and other things, which was your first startup, but other things as well?
Of course. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, that's amazing. So they paid you and then they lost everything.
Yeah, at the time, it wasn't that much. So
wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So in the general scheme of things, it was like, yeah.
All right. We'll just keep going. Zac Altman, co-founder of Loungebuddy and Taxi Pro. You're a serial entrepreneur. Welcome back. What are your markers of success? You sold Taxi Pro. How old were you when you sold Taxi Pro to Gabby Leibovich?
I was 18 or 19, probably 19, yeah.
Did they pay you a big bundle of money?
It wasn't that much. There were different competing offers at the time because I was speaking to Uber, I was speaking to them, I was speaking to the different taxi networks. And the taxi networks were going to pay more, but I saw that, and Uber was potentially going to pay more, but I saw that they wanted to build it into something bigger, and that really excited me. And so I kind of took a smaller amount for that. But again, like taxis weren't my interest, and so I was kind of shopping it around at that time.
Yeah. So, I mean, do you mind me asking, was it sort of like $1 million, 5 million, or was it $100,000 that you sold it for?
Yeah, it was less than $1 million.
Yeah. Okay. That's a pretty amazing result for your first business.
Definitely a good outcome. But,
yeah. What are your markers of success now, even looking back on your sort of short but meteoric career?
Like my markers of my personal success?
Yeah, yeah. And what you've achieved in business. How do you feel about all that?
Yeah, so I'm baseline like somewhat of an insecure person. So I look at it and I still think of like, I'm not good enough. Like there's still, you look around and there's so many people who are so much better. But then I think personally, one of the things that I'm proudest of with Loungebuddy, for example, is that we had a lot of life-changing outcomes for members of our team. And it wasn't just like the founders that did well, like a lot of the team had equity. And so hearing about people buying, their first houses and, all these different things that they could now be able to do as a result of like being part of what we built. And it's kind of this, like, it's this really beautiful thing of like, they took a chance on us as a company and as a team. And as a result, like, they had a positive outcome as well. And I think that's why I think like a lot of companies should be giving more equity and kind of, I'd like to say, like, spreading the love a little bit more across the team, because like the more positive outcomes and stuff that we have for general teams, the better it is. And like the more invested that people are. And I'm not sure some of the Australian programs are super favorable towards giving people equity. I know that's changed recently and I'm still brushing up on it, but yeah, I think more equity to more people should be a concept.
Yeah. Do you think that would change the environment here a bit? You've been critical of the sort of the startup environment here, or that it's not, it doesn't allow people to flourish enough.
Yeah, I think there should be a lot more benefits to giving employees equity. And when it comes to like tax offsets and stuff like that, there should be more favorable, like in the US, there's certain programs around like QSBS and whatnot, which encourages investments in small businesses. And so you get a lot of tax concessions and stuff for that. And it encourages, even once you've had an exit, to try as quickly as possible to put money back into companies and entities to continue to get the tax benefits. And I think like you can't just say like go and innovate. If people just innovate more and we should encourage innovation more, like I think sentiment is there, but you got to kind of put the policy and put the actual incentive behind it. Make it so people aren't investing in startups and investing in companies out of like the goodwill of their heart.
Or just because they get a tax deduction and therefore we have lots of failures as well. I mean, that can be a problem too.
I think like Silicon Valley has a lot of failures. And I think it's kind of rolling the dice of, if you roll a dice 100 times, how many times are you going to roll a 6 versus if you roll it, 1,000 times. And so the more chances that we have in order to create the successes, I think that's generally favorable for the ecosystem. And usually it shows that it's like the return on investment pays off. That it's like if you look at a lot of startup funds and all of that, it shows that the more companies that you put money into, the more sure it is that you're going to get some sort of positive return. And so I think even though we will end up with more failures, you'll end up with more outside successes. And so I think we should take more chances. And I would encourage everyone, if you can put, like, I think 5% is a nice number of your savings and stuff into, whether it's a startup fund or different groups, like to diversify your portfolio. It should be an asset class. Like you have bonds, you have your stocks, and then you have like the high potential growth startups, but you can put it into a fund that could be returning like 20% year on year, but it's just locked up like private equity is for multiple years. And so like there's a lot of potential and positive outcomes that can come from investing in startups.
When you went to create Loungebuddy with Tyler, what did you learn from these other experiences that you took with you to Loungebuddy?
Yeah, so from Taxi Pro, I definitely learned that like in any exit outcome, I wanted the product and like what we built to continue, because it's very disheartening to work on something for years and then to just have it die one day. And
so you always saw an exit strategy. Why is that?
For Loungebuddy?
Yeah, you didn't want to stay in it for 20 years?
If you're speaking to an investor, and you have to put this stuff on your pitch deck and everything, when you're speaking to an investor, you got to look at like the entry and the exit point. And who's going to put money into you if you're saying, we're never going to sell, it's always going to be private, you're never going to get your money back. Right? Like there's no, why would you invest in that? And so you have to tell the story around either you're going to IPO or you're going to be acquired, one of the two. Or you're going to be so profitable that you're going to return the money and then some, and it's going to be so magical. And so you kind of have to think about this outcome.
All right. So sorry, I pushed you off onto another tangent. Yeah. What did you take with you?
Yeah. So first one was wanted the product to continue even after I'd gone. So like longevity of that, I think, was super important. I think the second one is just I was a better like product engineer and builder. Like I knew what I was doing a little bit more. I knew what the different tactics were. I knew what my priorities should be. I knew all the tools of the trade. Knew how to get featured. Know how to do all these different things. And so for me, it was just you're kind of starting 10 steps in.
Yeah.
Which that experience is incredibly useful.
In the first days, say of Loungebuddy and Taxi Pro, did you actually build the app yourself, or did you have to bring in a couple of software engineer friends, or?
So Taxi Pro was all me through the end. For Loungebuddy, I was building a lot of pieces of it, like even up until the end, probably maybe once we were acquired by American Express, I didn't really write code so much anymore just because I was so busy on other stuff. But I always liked building, and it's like any new foray that we went into, whether it was like building the API endpoints for our partners, it's like I would be dabbling my toes or fingers or whatever the phrasing is into that first, while like the team would focus on like the core product and iterating, because I know how to do stuff. I knew the entire infrastructure that we had, and I knew how to do stuff quicker, so I could be more like a mercenary and get stuff done in a day or two.
Yeah.
And so yeah, through and through, always been part of the building.
Was there one crucial step that really catapulted Loungebuddy in its growth?
I would say it's a collection of steps. Like I also have a theory. It goes back to the same thing. I know I keep talking about it, but increasing your surface area of opportunity, that it's like part of it is just time. Like if you have a company that's around for a year versus 5 years, like if you're around for 5 years, that's 5 times the amount of time that you have to succeed. And so like longevity is important, but I think over a timeline, like getting featured pretty early on was a huge moment for us. Like getting our first, like having our like lounges or airlines signing a partnership with us early on.
When you say featured, you mean in lists of, oh, you must have this app if you go traveling?
So for us getting featured, we were like front page of the App Store. Like this is before the Today list and everything. It was, you went onto the App Store and we were one of like the 5 apps at the top that would scroll through. And so...
And sorry, just to digress again, do you get that because you are genuinely a good app and someone's assessed it as that, or do you pay for that?
There is no amount of money that you can pay to get that.
Really? Okay.
Aside from like investing in a good product. So for a lot of those, like particularly around like iOS launches, like the quick, easy tip is use their new features and be a showcase for like why the new version of iOS is the best version of iOS. And so for us at that time, we had the whole new design style. We used a lot of like the new interesting APIs that they'd introduced. And the second part is it was a good app. And like, so the experience was good. And then the third part is you want to be unique. Like an easy part for us that kind of had the longevity of being featured over time is that if you wanted to create a list of the top 10 travel apps, like you're not going to do 10 airline apps.
No.
And so you're going to pick 2 or 3 airlines. You're going to pick 1 or 2 car companies, 1 or 2 hotel companies. And so we were the one that was always in the category of like your experience at the airport.
Yeah, right.
And so like we would beat out people like Qantas and all the others because like the Delta app is better than the Qantas one.
Yeah, right.
But we're not competing on the same playing field, but we're still in travel. And so we'd be featured alongside. And so being unique is useful as well.
So I asked about sort of one step that may have catapulted growth. What was the key challenges? I mean, it's never 10 steps up. It's usually, 2 steps forward, 1 back, or one
Everything
forward and
was
3
perfect
back?
the whole time. Nothing ever went wrong. No,
I don't believe you.
I don't believe myself either. No, there was a lot of challenges. Like I think early on, when we did get our first partners to start selling Lounge Access, in my mind, and again, now that I think back on this, it's really stupid. But I was like, we have our first partner, like let's plan on how many bookings we're going to get per day. And then the first week that we launched, we got 0 bookings. And you go from like, we're going to get so many bookings. And at the time, I think like there's the naivety of it. But then like I look back on it now, it's like, it was Alaska Airlines that had like 5 lounges across the US, and like nobody knew us for booking. And so who were we to think that all of a sudden we're going to get bookings every day for this unknown feature, for this location that we don't even have that many people going through. And so what we learned over time is that like we struggled with a lot of our bookings until we had a critical mass of, I think it was over 150 lounges. And like credit to Brent and Tyler, they did all the research into this of like which airports we needed in order to be able to market, like we sell lounge access and get the partnerships to where we could do general marketing to where we were likely to hit most people on most trips, so that like our marketing would pay off and that people could rely on using us. And it wasn't until we had that critical mass of lounges, which is hard to get when you're not selling very many lounges, much access before. But it was very clear, I think it was like the 150 lounge mark, that after then, that our bookings just started to go up and up and up because people could rely on us, and we had a lot of the right locations, and we had diversity of locations. And yeah, it's like in Dubai, we had like 10 different lounges and hotels and different places that we were selling access to.
Wow.
Hotels in airports. Yeah.
So that was the biggest challenge?
The biggest challenge is getting partners when you know that even once you get the partner, you're not going to make them any money. And you kind of have to like fake it a bit and kind of do.
How so?
You're massaging like the timelines and talking to them about the pricing and different stuff and just maintaining the relationship even when you're getting no customers. That it's like, trust us in the long term. Like, you know, we haven't put efforts into this. We're just setting things up. Like, be patient with us. Like, it doesn't cost you anything. Let's just keep it like this for another year. And then we'll try really hard in the next year. And so luckily, like, we had the turning point. But yeah, it's hard when you launch something, you think it's going to be big like your previous launches, and then you just get flatlined.
Well, it's going to be an overnight success, of course.
Yeah,
we put all this work in. I mean, is that a myth? I know you've talked about this before.
Oh, yeah. I hate the whole overnight success thing. And like, yes, there are a few companies that kind of are outliers, but that's the reason they're notable, is because they're outliers. And it's like OpenAI is the easiest example now of like ChatGPT. Everyone's talking about it as this magical new thing that people don't realize has been around for the last 6-7 years. And so 6 years ago,
people was only launched at the end of last year, wasn't it?
ChatGPT was launched at the end of last year, but OpenAI, the APIs to actually like use the underlying language models were around for years prior. Like there's the multiple different, there's version 2, 3, 3.5, and it was only when ChatGPT was launched. After version 3.5 was around for a little while before the more consumer product was launched. And so now all of a sudden people are like, oh, this magical stuff has just started. And it's like all of this stuff has been around for a while. And I think...
But meaning there's been a lot of hard work put in and a lot of iterations, usually with companies, to make them an overnight success.
Yeah, exactly. And it's I think people like putting this myth around that everything's an overnight success kind of doesn't give people the time horizon to actually try properly. Because if you're young and you're building a company and you think like, if it's not a success within the first 6 months or a year, then I'm a failure, or the product or the company's a failure, is kind of, it's this lie that we've kind of perpetuated when really like we should be telling people that, you know, you should iterate and it does take time. And if you truly believe that it's going to be something, even if you are onto the right thing and you're doing all the right moves and all that sort of stuff, like it can still take years until it actually flips into something that is hugely successful and all of that. But yeah, you shouldn't have such a short time horizon.
Yeah. Did that happen to you? Do you think you thought, oh, this is going to happen really quickly?
I definitely had that early on, and definitely like with Loungebuddy and everything, like my patience was kind of tested through that process, because like things do take longer than you want. And so that's where I'm looking at it now as I go to the future of, you know, what would I want to be doing, or what do I want to focus on for the next 5-10 years? It's not what's fun for this year. It's what's going to be interesting for the long term. And so where people get wrapped up in like chatbots or like Web3 and crypto and like AI stuff right now, it's like these are all waves of fads that kind of come through. And so is there an underlying company or product that you can build that maybe uses those tools? Maybe it uses AI, but like unless you've already been doing AI for years, like you're probably not the right person to be like jumping on the AI wave to build something truly novel in AI. That doesn't mean you can't build like a social product that uses AI, but maybe like your fundamental is the social product, your fundamental is the travel product or like finance product or something. That's your fundamental that uses these technologies that kind of come in waves.
So you stayed on at Amex for what, 4 or 5 years?
For 2 years.
Oh, 2 years.
2 years.
Sorry. Okay. You stayed on at Amex to help propel Loungebuddy and to settle it into such a massive company. I mean, how difficult was that? Because it's usually very difficult for founders to then kind of mesh with a very corporate structure.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of learnings from both sides. I think fundamentally, like on the positive side, like Loungebuddy and American Express, we had a lot of very complementary and similar values. And so like that's best exemplified when like COVID hit and the world shut down, travel shut down, every lounge had shut down. But Amex had this policy of we're not firing anyone. Like at least for this year, like the company stays and we're going to figure it out. And like they kept that promise and like we were able to like move quickly and, you know, help within the travel industry and all that sort of stuff. But they had like a very good culture that's focused around people and the team and all of that. So I think culture-wise, like we were a good fit. I think the hard parts that will happen with any acquisition, because I think a lot of people don't realize how much work goes into an acquisition. They think, oh, one day you get acquired and then you run away the next day and everything's magical. But, you know, there's a lot of steps of moving processes, you got to shift a lot of your systems. And as a small 30-person company moving into a 60,000-person organization, there's a whole different dynamic of how you operate. And you have to relearn that very, very quickly. And so like what I learned is that while I enjoyed like the team that we're on and a lot of people within the company, I don't like big companies. I like building things small. And I also didn't like that as we look to the future, like we'd already figured out a lot of what the next steps that we wanted to do as a team and everything was. Like for me, it was a solved problem and it just needed execution and a lot of tweaking along the way, but it was a solved problem. And as soon as something's solved, I get bored. And in my mind, there were a lot better other people who are better at executing, more operations focused, that would be a lot better suited and better than me at kind of executing the next steps. And so that's when I decided to move away. And like this, half of our team is still there, which is kind of a testament to Amex as an acquiring company, that it's like, you know, the team is still there and they're still innovating and moving forward and all of that, which doesn't always happen. A lot of the time it's the team gets frustrated and leaves. And then you have this big company that's kind of stuck with something and it's kind of a bit of a mess. Like couldn't have picked, like one thing that I do remember is from our original pitch decks, because when you have to talk about like potential exit opportunities for like investors, you kind of talk about IPO path or you identify the different acquiring companies, and our target, like in bold highlighted one, was American Express as the ideal company to acquire us, because like we were basically building something that was valuable we're building something that American Express valued a lot. And so it was such a natural, like complementary relationship.
Do you mind me asking what you sold it for?
Don't mind you asking, but I can't answer it.
Okay. Can you give me an idea of the valuation when you sold it?
Like just as I'm thinking about how I can phrase it that would give the hints that won't get me in trouble. I don't know. I don't know a way to phrase how.
Okay.
That was so.
Because a few years before it had been valued, at about 25 million Australian dollars.
Yeah. So in 2016, when we received the investment from Founders Fund, it was valued at 25 million Australian dollars. And that was before we had our relationship with American Express. That was before we were profitable and before we had a lot of our lounge customers. So can project that out a little bit, if you will.
4 or 5 times?
You can project it out however you want.
Okay.
But yeah, I can't share exact details.
Okay. No, it's so interesting because you were still sort of well under 30, weren't you, when you sold to Amex?
Yeah, I think I was 27.
Oh, amazing. So, I mean, do you come from a family of entrepreneurs? Are you folks in business? You mentioned your grandfather had been, he was kind of entrepreneurial and in business.
Yeah, so my grandparents are immigrants to Australia, and so they started in the schmutter business, so clothing manufacturing back in the day, back in Alexandria.
What was their business? Would we know it?
No, so they would do like clothing manufacturing for groups
different,
for
Suzanne
and stuff.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, and so it's like their big thing was they would take European fashion and then manufacture cheaper versions of it here, and then sell it.
When we had a thriving clothing industry here.
Exactly.
Clothing manufacturing,
Yeah, and so that's what they were doing back in the day. But they started in Australia. It's like my grandmother was a cleaner and my grandfather was driving forklifts and stuff around. And so for them, it was always like they worked hard and it's like strong work ethic. And we're always like interested in doing deals or business or like looking at opportunities and stuff like that. So definitely get that from them and that inspiration from them. And then like my dad had worked within startups, not during a great time, like during the .com crash here in Australia. And so
in what capacity did he
was
work
on the
in
finance side.
Okay.
So he got to go into a lot of companies and shut them down or downsize them, which was very depressing work, I guess I would say.
Yeah.
And so didn't want to do that anymore.
Yeah. So you've talked about, in terms of what you might do next, you've talked about that you're interested in human-centric tech and digital trust. Can those two phrases kind of exist, or are they oxymoronic?
I think like one of my biggest concerns that we have right now, particularly with large language models, is that we've gone from like a small group of people generating some random content to anyone on earth can kind of generate seemingly human readable and seemingly true content. And then not only that, but then generate the sources for that and generate the sources for those, to where there's this chain of content that we don't quite trust. And at the same time, we've had the almost like defunding of media industries and groups like that, like the groups that you almost want more than ever, of like these trusted voices that I know that they do the research and I know that they have a good reputation. And so I can trust, what they're saying. We've kind of eroded those voices in favor of just random bots on the internet, random bots on Twitter and whatever it is. And so we're at this really, I think, somewhat dangerous time of like the erosion of trust in what you can read and what you can see. And there hasn't been many solutions around like how can we validate or how can we provide authority to content on the internet.
Yeah.
And how do we know who we can trust? And maybe that's different for different groups of us, that it's like I might trust different sources to what other people might trust. And, that's okay. How do we figure out how we can almost like know that what we're seeing is real? And that's exacerbated when you have like AI, not AI stuff, but VR and augmented reality sort of stuff, of like being able to trust our eyes is what we understand is we're at this really interesting point. And so I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done there. And I think the second thing is like when it comes to startups and building companies, like a lot of groups have started very much focusing on this idea of like optimizing metrics. and that we all just are numbers as users, and it's like whatever we can do to edge out the extra 2% conversion or anything like that. And it's kind of at the odds of, or at the expense of, humanity and people's experience. And it's kind of, I look at it like, where is the fun in building stuff? Like, where is the personality in products? Like, why does everything look the same and feel the same? And it's like, we all use the same templates, and it's all like, I just look at that and it's boring. And it's everything has become like so over optimized, and it's like, where's the personality? Where's the humanity in it? Where's the like interesting, exciting elements to it? And so I'm very much in favor of like, even if it's not efficient, even if it's not like perfectly optimized, if you feel like it would make a good experience or it'd be like interesting or fun to do, like I would encourage more of that in product development. And I also think about it in life of like, when you go through your day, we kind of hyper optimize everything, and then we put this gym session at the end, and it's like, okay, we've got to get everywhere quickly. And it's like, why not
fit everything in?
Yeah. And it's kind of like, if you reduce the optimization and you have to like walk 15 minutes to get here and there, and all of a sudden you're like spreading these things throughout the day, you're like less efficient with how you're doing things. And then all of a sudden, like, you don't need that gym session at the end of the day because you've already done your fitness in like walking between meetings or doing that sort of stuff. And so like there can be like beauty in efficiency. And I think like, yeah, we don't have to be so hyper optimized, and like we can do more, we can give ourselves a break and like do more fun things.
Well, that's really encouraging to hear, because that may be the mindset you're thinking of, perhaps the next business or the next product that you come up with. Just a few really quick questions that I ask all my guests, and it doesn't have to be a long answer. What are you obsessed about at the moment? Be it a cause, a film, a meal?
So I think multiple different answers to this. First one is like mental health. I think that's a super important industry that a lot of people are taking advantage of. But I think there's a lot of like roads to development there. Second thing would be like AI language models, all of that. I think it's like a fascinating industry right now. And on a very like nerdy technical level, HTMX, playing around with that right now. And I think it's like a fascinating departure from single page apps.
HTMX, sorry, what's that?
So it's a way that allows you to do like Ajax-y asynchronous calls from HTML. So instead of having to build a whole single page or separate app to do something that feels interactive, you can do that in a more lightweight way without having to deploy a whole separate single page app.
Was that the end of that answer?
Yeah.
Obsessed about. No,
a lot of fascinations.
That's great. Mental health, do you feel you started to burn out?
Yes, definitely at the end. Like when you're going through an acquisition process, you're working two jobs, where it's like you're working the day job and you can't really tell everyone within the company that we might be acquired. We're doing due diligence right now, because what if it doesn't happen?
Yeah,
what if, like, is that going to distract
secrecy,
people?
Yeah.
And so you're working your day job doing the regular company stuff, and then in the evening you're doing acquisition stuff. And then once that's all over, your reward is that you now have to do integration things in addition to doing this. And then working within a large company, you kind of get told no more. You go from being able to do what you want to you have to fit within a domain, and like not getting the reward at the end of kind of a lot of work is a common cause for burnout. And so, yeah, at the end, I didn't realize how much energy I'd lost. And so it took me a good year after leaving American Express and leaving to kind of recover from the 10 years prior of like not stopping in startups and going from one thing to the other and building and all my days and weekends and everything, and maybe taking a week off. And so, yeah, burnout's a big thing. I think there's a lot of issues around like depression and anxiety. I think ADHD is a very common topic right now. And I think like the current system in Australia around psychiatric care around that is quite abusive. There's no reason it should cost so much. And I think there's just all these different areas of mental care that right now the systems aren't set up for people's individual success. And at the end of the day, it hurts people. And it's like, it's a very common, it's similar to saying it's like someone comes in with a broken arm and it's like, okay, that's not covered. you would never say that.
Yeah.
And so, but we're
would
doing
just
the
give
same
care.
thing for mental health.
Yeah.
And then you have a lot of people kind of taking advantage of the situation, which I think is also unhealthy.
Still a few quick questions, quick answers.
Not so quick.
No, that's all right. What's the toughest thing you think you've learned, or the toughest thing you've faced in your journey so far?
I mean, firing someone is probably, I don't think anyone understands, and I'm like a very emotional person, and so you don't understand kind of the hit that it takes, and so like people have families and everything, and you're responsible for their livelihood, and then you got to tell them that, like, given their shitty day, it's never easy. And if it is easy, I don't know what's happening for you, but yeah.
Yeah. What's the biggest challenge that you faced in your journey, your entrepreneurial journey so far?
Biggest challenge, I'd say one of the hardest parts, well, I think big challenge is doing the acquisition process at the same time as trying to run the company. That was a big challenge. I would say second one, we'll do that. That's the big, and then integrating within a larger company. I think so much, you have to learn so much so quickly, and like your company's on the line and the team's on the line, and you gotta kind of make it work, and you gotta play the character of like therapist and like architect and everything in between. So
what would you say to other young entrepreneurs, would-be entrepreneurs who think they've got a great idea and want to chase it?
Do it. Just do it. I think it's a Nike one. But I think a lot of people, there's a lot of ideas. Ideas are a dime a dozen. You learn the most by doing it, potentially failing, or maybe you like iterate and you shift what you want to do. But I think sitting on an idea and just waiting for the right time, or waiting for you got to at least try something, or meet people who can help you try, like get out there and do something. And so like the best advice that was given to me, and it's kind of very apt right now, is one of the times when I was visiting the US in 2012, I actually met with Sam Altman, who's the founder of OpenAI. And his big question to me, because I was talking about wanting to move to the US and everything, and his question is like, why aren't you here? It's like, what's stopping you from being here? And it's like, whatever excuse I could, it's like, there was no excuse for that. And so then I moved, and the rest is history.
Zac Altman, it's been a real pleasure speaking to you. You're so inspiring, so well done, and thank you for joining me on Build It, They'll Come, and good luck in your next venture.
Thank you so much. It's been a great time.